How's it going, Frosty friends? And welcome to our Rambles About Mentality series, which is going to be all about the way that you think about the game. We've talked about how to play and how to make decisions and all the factors to consider, but there's this little extra bit that everyone knows exists, but so few people are talking about, which is, you know, how do I process events within the game and how I feel about things. Okay, what happened to this village? Village is gone. It's a missing village. And so, you know, we'll be talking about things like, you know, like how to process success and failure, how to maximize your learning, and, you know, topics of that nature, I suppose. So today's topic is going to be about the distinction between being responsive and being impulsive. Excuse me, being responsive and being actionable. That's the two, I guess, behaviors that we're going to be considering. Now, I mean something very specific when I say like responsive, right? So like when I say like responsive, like I would generally characterize like responsive behavior in this context to be very impulsive, that, you know, features like very little to no thinking involved with sort of like the decision-making process and like how they, you know, and like your behavior. It's reactive, and so like, you know, like you're sort of just like responding to events happening and to like external stimulus and like sort of like what your natural inclinations are, as opposed to, you know, spending like a little more time thinking things through. And it's like very unfocused, so there's not really like a lot of goals in mind there, short of like fulfilling whatever short-term obligation or inclination you're feeling. So acting is very thoughtful activity, right? Featuring lots of thinking and reflection. It's a very proactive activity, which means that you're going to have clear goals and objectives that you're trying to realize. And so if you're guessing which of the two that I'm going to favor, I'm dead. It's going to be acting, not responding. Because responding basically means that you're just allowing yourself to be tugged along by the circumstances, right? That you've got no objective or agenda. I think like for some people, right, like that distinction is like not going to be super clear. And so I guess like an analogy I would make is, or like I guess like a place where you can see the two behaviors in action that people are very familiar with is like how you use your phone. So there's a distinct difference between texting and calling someone, right? So when you're texting someone, you are sending like a message to them, right? And then you're going to be responsive because you're waiting for the notification of the message to come back to you, right? And so in the meantime, like you're going to probably go and like do something else, you know, and then you're going to be responding to like a stimulus, right? Like which is the message arriving before you text back, right? And that response is actually going to be a distraction, right? Like you're going to stop doing whatever it is you're doing, and you're going to stop committing all of your mental effort to whatever the thing that you did while you're waiting for the text message to come in, and then you're going to focus on the text message. So it's like, and that context switching, as many know, like, you know, like shifting your attention like that is like really bad for you, and it's like I think primary reason why a lot of people like struggle to maintain focus and remain disciplined and also to perform well. It's because like they're very good at distracting themselves. You know, in contrast, calling someone, right, is very like, it should generally be a very like thought out thing, because you are calling them and you are aiming to complete a conversation, right? Like you can't just say something and then like the other person just like walks away and does some other thing, and then you can go distract yourself with something else. It's like when you call someone, right, like you're both like agreeing to have like an active real-time conversation with an objective in mind, right? You're trying to accomplish something there. So there's like no capacity for like, you know, distracting yourself or anything like that. So it's like, so you're thinking, all right, great. So Frosty just decided to lecture me, like, you know, be like an old person, but like why I should stop texting people, and why is he talking about this like when it comes to Apex? So the reason like why I'm becoming, I think you'll start to see sort of like when I start describing some of the behaviors that, you know, that have their correlation when it comes to playing in Apex, right? So responsive behaviors are going to like lead to like shifting goals, because you're not really sure. You're not setting a goal, right? Like you're just sort of like responding to things as they're happening. So then, you know, some games right? Like it's going to be about like finding the win. Some games it's going to be about like, you know, getting like lots of kills or pumping out lots of damage. Some games it's going to be, you know, about, you know, just like being silly or doing funny things or feeling like you're cool or whatever.
Reloading. Good. We're inside.
And like those shifting goals, right, are going to make it really difficult for you to like actually start to form criteria and like hypotheses and start like building like an underlying fundamental understanding of like why certain things work or don't work. Like another responsive type behavior is gonna be like blaming your teammates, right? Because you're gonna like receive like negative stimulus, right? Like, you know, like a failure state or whatever. And so, you know, and in order to fulfill your immediate you know, compulsion, right, like which is going to be, I don't know, like to protect your ego or something like that, then you're going to just like search for like the path of like least emotional resistance, which is going to, instead of like evaluating yourself, evaluating what you did wrong and like what your points of improvement are, like the way easier thing to do, right, is just to say it's like some other person, right, some other factor outside your control. And like what better source is that than your teammates who are, you know, like it's like to some extent their responsibility to like play together with you and to help you be successful. Right, like that's another like form of responsive behavior. Another responsive behavior is just like running around aimlessly, like hoping for things to happen in the lobby, right? Like not really like making an effort to know what's going out on the map, not making an effort to try to understand like how squads move around on the map, or try to make any sort of like predictions or anything like that. Even this drop, right? Like so, like I actually had like a disagreement with like DK about like dropping at this location, you know, and his justification was like you know, like me and Invis like drop here and it works, right? That's like a responsive behavior. Like you're responding to, you know, positive stimulus instead of like searching for a root cause of like what factors actually contribute to making a landing location good or bad, right? You know, like one of the major things that makes this like a not good landing location is that it's a central location and actually a very significant map choke that a lot of squads are going to rotate towards. So the probability of getting backsighted when you land here is actually very, very high. And your ability to like make, and like the amount of squads that you have to keep track of is also equally high. And like the trade-off you're making is, I don't know, like for, I actually don't know what, because like the loot here is like pretty mediocre also. So, you know, like, yeah, sure, like maybe you'll like have like a good game or something like here or there, you know, like XYZ location, maybe not specifically this location, just like any location, right? But like if you don't like have like a good strong understanding of exactly why like you're landing at a location and like what your plan is like for landing there, then like, you know, then that actually constitutes like, that's like another form of a responsive behavior. Another like example of like a responsive behavior is going to be looting slowly, right? Like that's like you're just going to be like sort of like, instead of having like an objective to like move through the map, right, to like move and like reach a certain objective or a certain location and have urgency, like, you know, instead of doing that, right, like you're just going to be sort of just like looking around. It's like, oh, here's this piece of loot, here's that piece of loot, and you're like, you're gonna be making decisions very slowly about like what, you know, like what you're gonna take, right? You're not like, you don't have like an end state of like your backpack in mind, and so like the speed at which you're going to be making decisions is like, you know, going to be like a lot lower. So it's like, you know, you can see, even see here, right? Like right now, like, you know, like, and I'm like sort of like letting this happen because I don't really care. Like, you know, like we're being like very reactive right now, right? Like we don't have like a clear like squad that we're going to be going over to attack first, you know, from a known power position, or, you know, or that we're going to try and third party. Like there's no like coordinated play going on here. We don't really, you know, we're just like sort of like waiting for fighting to break out around us, and then like we're going to go, right? And as you can imagine, you know, like the success rate of, you know, squads that play like that is much, much lower. And it's like tempting, right, to sort of like, you know, just give yourself over to that, but I like strongly advise against doing that, right? Because you're just putting like you're just releasing what very little control you have over the situation by sort of like not, I guess, being intentional and behaving like super responsibly like this. So it's like, right, like this, like now this fight is like pretty bad because like inherently like we're walking into like an uphill, like an unfavorable uphill fight without like really any plan on like where we're going to retreat to or how we're going to turn this fight around. And like we didn't like have like a flow chart in place of like, you know, if people are up there first, you know, then we're going to leave.
We're down one.
And it's like, you know, I'm like kind of stuck here right now, like with an RE45 and like a Mastiff and squad mates who are not prepared to back me up, trying to fight into a position where like they've got head glitches and I've got like pretty mediocre cover, and it sounds like they've got range, so like I don't really have like a whole lot of options right now.
Another
which is just going to make it extremely difficult for me to be able to do anything, right? Another example of like reactive behavior is like not focus firing, right? Like just like shooting at like like whichever shots are easiest and closest to you, right? Instead of, you know, sometimes taking more difficult shots because your teammates like calling out. Not focus firing, as you all know, you know, not a desirable behavior because, you know, if you're not focus firing, then it's going to take you much longer to kill people, and you're overall as a squad going to be less effective and make it much more likely that you're going to get knocked. So it's like right now, even like, right, like it's like super tempting to like be like reactive and like, you know, respond to our impulse to like retreat from an enemy squad like when we like not got a lot of loot, but it's like right now like this is probably like going to be like one of our best opportunities to turn around, right? Because I mean like this was because like it was like we had high ground and they were trying to push us, so probably like holding the roof here, right, like, it was going to be like the more like ideal thing to do, right? So instead of like reacting to the immediate impulse that we had in that moment to sort of like retreat because we're scared and afraid, right, like we take an action, like we're actionable, right? Like we are proactive about like we have a plan and like the things that we're trying to accomplish and do. And so that's like sort of like the difference, right? Like another like super like easy example is like not protecting yourself while you're fighting, right? So it's like when you're fighting, just sort of like not like using good movement and not using cover because you're responding to the immediate stimulus, right? Like you're responding to like the damage numbers pop up into the damage indicator and to like, you know, like hitting shots, and like that's the only thing you're responding to. It's like you're fulfilling that immediate compulsion to like output damage, right? But you're not really like thinking, you know, in the bigger picture, right? Like you don't have like an overall goal, right, of winning the fight and like being just downright like being effective. So it's like these are like all things, you know, that are like responsive behaviors. And so I think like hopefully I should make it very clear like why like action like acting based behaviors are like so much more desirable, because like they are things that have purpose in mind and like actually have like thought through like what the root causes of like XYZ thing are, and are fundamentally sound and are far more likely to lead to like successful situations, right? So like, you know, active like type behaviors, right, like are, you know, like with the guides that like I make like for like the drop strategies, like those are like very active, you know, like actively minded guides, provided that you actually like have like a powerful like core understanding of exactly like how like, you know, as long as you use them to sort of like kickstart like the construction of a strong understanding of like why they're successful, you know, like then they will lead to like, you know, a very like active, like behaviorally active like plan, right, where you've got like a very structured first few minutes to your game because you know exactly what's going to happen and like what sort of information and resources you have at your disposal, and you've flow charted exactly the things that you're going to be doing next, and you're watching like where the enemy squads are so that you have like a plan in place of like exactly how you're like going to be successful with priorities and all that sort of stuff. Or like, you know, how instead of like sort of like, not gonna lie, like using like kills and damage like as like a substitute for, oops. Using like kills and damage as like a substitute for, you know, an actual win rate, right? Like you're gonna focus on like one goal and only one goal, right? Which is like your win rate, which is like winning. And, you know, like I guess it means like that you're going to actually have to learn how to win, like what are consistent plays, and to sort of like start to build like a theory and a hypothesis in your head of like sort of like what does it mean to be successful, you know, like in a ranked context and just in a, you know, overall context. And I think it's like actually like if you think in an actionable type like mindset, you're going to think like you're going to ignore like that easy like immediate stimulus, which is like, you know, like to, I think for a lot of players, like because they're just bad at that given moment right then and there, to respond to that immediate stimulus of like not winning a whole lot of RP, and then like they just start like thinking like, oh, like you just hide and rat and camp instead of like moving around the map like with purpose and start trying to build that understanding of like what that purpose should be and how to execute on it. So it's like it's way easier to just kind of like brainlessly try to like hide and like not understand the game, right? And so it's like if you set as your goal, right, just to win, then like you avoid that like degenerate behavior. Like that's like, you know, like you shortcut that. Like that's like a point that like those players are going to have to learn, is that doesn't get you like where you want to go if you're trying to go as far as you can. Or worse, you never learn that lesson, you quit the game and you complain that it's just like a super campy meta, and you just never learn how to step beyond that. It's like these are like all those kinds of things, I suppose. So yeah, I guess like that's just the end message, right? Is to think about the way that you are behaving and evaluating the game. And like honestly, like this goes for like, you know, in person or in real life. If like you are like reacting to things happening to you, right? Or if you have agency, you have a plan, and you're trying to do things, right? Like you have objectives, because like that makes a huge difference. You like see like so many people like just get, like sort of like dragged along by like, you know, there's like so much stimulus like available to you like at any given moment in the world right now, like, right? Like it's like there's so many things calling for your attention, calling for, you know, like your time and energy. And so it's like if you just like allow yourself to be dragged along by like, you know, like all these people who are just sort of like vying because like they want your attention because it makes money, right? Like your attention is money for a lot of people. So it's like, if you're just like allowing yourself to be dragged along by their whims, right, then you're just not really going to ever be able to really get things that you actually want, or even know if there are things that you want, right? Because you're just sort of like letting things happen to you.